Welcome to EduSaathi.com, your partner in education. In this lecture, we'll discuss the concept of sentence jumbles. Now, sentence jumbles is something that we've been doing in our junior classes, wherein we were given some words and we had to rearrange those words to form a meaningful sentence. The concept still remains the same, but with a little difference, that is, that now you're not given the words but parts of sentences which you need to rearrange before you mark it to be the correct sentence. So, sentence jumble exercise is based basically on the ability of the responder to identify the correct sequencing of the past, like what comes first and what comes afterwards. For that, we must understand that there is a specific rule that is followed to form a sentence. Generally, whenever we make a sentence, we form it in this form that we first keep the subject, that is the person or the thing that is doing something. For us, like the subject is the noun or the pronoun that does the work. So that thing is known as the subject, and whatever he does becomes the verb, which follows the subject. And ultimately, the other things are kept into the predicate part of the sentence, which is kept after the verb. So the general structure of the sentence basically is that first we keep the subject, then we keep the verb, and lastly we keep the predicate, that is the other things, which may include where is the work done, or how, with whom is it done, or what are the adjectives of the subject, or etc. etc. For example, I say that Ram is playing football, or Ram is eating food. So if I'm writing this sentence as Ram is eating food, so whoever does the work or the main protagonist of the sentence becomes the subject. Now, thus Ram is the subject. Now, whatever he is doing becomes the verb. So he's eating, so this becomes the verb, and the rest entire thing becomes the predicate. So food becomes the predicate. In our junior classes, we've already done this concept that we used to mark the subject in the predicate, and we used to say everything that follows the subject becomes the predicate. Yes, that rule is true, just that we now extended it by saying that anything that the person, whoever he is doing something becomes the subject, whatever is he doing becomes the verb, and everything else that follows the verb becomes the predicate. Now, there may be exceptions to this basic structure of the sentence. Now, I don't say a sentence cannot start with because or however or anything like that. Yes, a sentence may start with because, but the complete idea has to be justified. The complete thought has to be justified. For example, I say, uh, because it was raining, I preferred to commute by car. Now, in this sentence, although the sentence starts with because, but the complete package, the complete thought is justified. Thus, the sentence is correct. And herein, the understanding of the basic structure of the sentence, that is subject is followed by the verb, helps us to interpret the correct sequences. Why? Because I said I preferred. Now, preferred being the verb always followed I, which is the subject. Although the sentence is now starting with because, but even then the verb was following the subject. So this basic structure of the sentence helps us to understanding that how do we sequence the given options. Now, yet again, a sentence may be of any mood. It may be a cause effect statement, like because it was raining, I preferred to commute by the car. Now, this is a cause effect statement, that there was a cause that it was raining, and what was the effect, that I went by a car. It may be contrasting sentence, although the government is efficient, still there is a lag in the haves and have nots. Now, here there's a contrast shown in the sentence. A request, please pass me a glass of water. It may be an order, It may be a question, it may be a simple statement, Ram is eating food, so it could be anything. So the structure of the sentence, if we are aware about this structure, that the subject, then the verb, then the predicate, will be very much okay with the sequencing of the words. Now, let us discuss how do we solve these questions. Now, what exactly is the structure of the question? That you're given four parts or the four parts of the sentences. You have to arrange them and form the sequence of the sentence. And you'll be given options based on your interpretation. You can judge which option is correct. Before we start before we start discussing what exactly are the rules that we follow, let us discuss what are the general things that we must know before we attempt this question. The first thing, first of all, determine where is the subject and where is the predicate. Now, what is the subject? Subject is the part of the sentence that names a person or a thing that we are talking about. Now, in that sentence, Ram was the main focus person. So here, there, Ram became the subject. Predicate is that part of the sentence that tells something about the subject. So he was eating food. So it tells you about what was Ram doing. He was eating food. So that became the predicate. Then we identify the verbs. So the verb is eating. And then we put it into the sequence. We get Ram eating food. Ram is eating food. And then before we start solving, look for the options, scan the options, and most of the time you need not to check any other thing. You just make a pair of two parts that you judge that this part has to be followed by this part, and you just see that only one option says such a thing and you know where is the answer. So always before attempting the question, look for the options. Now let us discuss some rules. First rule says that there might be certain obvious openers to the sentence. Now, for example, we remember that in our junior section, the classes, we had stories that started with once upon a time there was a king. Now here, once upon a time is an obvious opener to the sentence as well as the story. So we may get certain obvious openers to the sentence. Yet again, a little knowledge about that. No sentence can ever start with because, but, or however. This thing helps us to determine where is the basic opener of the sentence. So, although we've discussed that there might be a case where you have a sentence opening with because, but this is a very rare chance. Generally, we start our answer, we start answering our question based on the concept that no sentence will ever start with because. Let's take an example. Here are the four parts of the sentence, and there are certain options given to you. You can pause the video for a second and then think about which of the given option forms the correct sequence of the sentence. Now, if I closely observe, it struck me. Now, it basically is pointing to something that becomes the focus area, right? And since it becomes the focus area, it has to be the subject, and the rule says that subject has to be proximally placed. After that, we keep the verb and then the predicate, the rest part of the sentence. So it has to be in the first part of the sentence. That is, one, say part number one has to be the first option, right? So the entire sentence has to start with the first part, which happens only in option number C. So the answer becomes option number C. Now see, I need not to check whether the sequence is correct or not, because I am completely sure, totally sure that the sentence has to start with the subject and the subject is it. So the first part has to come in the front. And since there's only one option where the first part comes in the first position, so that option becomes my answer. Now let's discuss another example with the same rule. In this example, we can see that there are two nouns, that is the gentleman and the rooms. Right. So either of these can be the subject of the sentence. So how do I decide? So I'm not aware what exactly is the subject of the sentence. So I move to the next part, that is the verb. So I look for the verb. Where is the verb? Verb is written here in the third part, which is are available for. Now estimate what can be available. Can the gentleman be available or the rooms? Now obviously the rooms can be available, so my subject becomes the rooms. So the subject is the rooms. So my fourth option has to be the subject. Now here if I check posh air conditioned, it is an adjective. And this adjectives can qualify the rooms. So the first part has to precede the fourth part, that is 1 and 4 have to come together, and then I have to keep the verb because the fourth has the subject which is always followed by the verb. So 1 4 3, and the sequence is 1 4 3, the last part is left, so I keep it here, which becomes 1 4 3 2. So the answer becomes option number B. How did I judge this? First of all, I estimated where's the verb. So it was in the option number 3. Then I placed the subject near the verb, that is it preceded the verb. So 3 is preceded by 4. Then this part of the sentence classifies or qualifies the subject. So it preceded the subject 143, and the last part is left. So I keep it here. So it became the answer. Another way you can approach the same question is by making the mandatory pairs, right? So here we can see that the structure of the sentence played a very crucial role in determining what is the correct answer. You may be confused that, like, while answering the question, you might have thought that yes, I have found the subject in 4, so the subject is 4, and it has to follow the verb has to follow the subject, so it is the 43, and here is the answer. No, it is not the answer, because this part of the sentence has to be near the subject. Why? Because it is qualifying the subject. As per the modifier theory, it says the adjectives are to be placed as near to the noun as possible. So posh and air conditioned is kept before the rooms, right? Now let's move to the next rule, which is that we may find sometimes that there are contrasting openers to the given sentence. Now, as we said in the sentence that because it was raining, I thought. Now it had a contrasting opener, or the sentence that we were talking just in the previous slide, we said posh and air conditioned fully furnished rooms. Now although we may think that fully furnished rooms have to start the sentence, but it had a very different opening. Likewise, if any part of the sentence starts with a contrasting opener, like although, notwithstanding, however, because, right? So there might be chances that it may serve to be the opening sentence of the opening part of the sentence, right? So how do we judge it? By making the pairs. Now let's take an example. Now in this sentence, I can clearly see that Einstein is the subject. And since it's the subject, it is placed towards the starting, right? And then it follows the verb was is kept in the first part, and then the predicate. So he was something, he was weak. So 1 and 3 are a pair, right? And 1 and 3 is a pair. And now I also see a phrase that says, although a great scientist, which is a contrasting part. And it is also qualifying the subject, which is Einstein, because he was a great scientist. We all know that, right? So it is a contrast, plus it is qualifying the subject. And since it's qualifying the subject, it has to be kept near to the subject, right? And since it has to be kept near to the subject, and it is a contrast, it will be preceding, the second phrase will precede the first phrase. So the trio becomes 2, 1, 3, and the answer becomes option number B. So we see that there may be contrasting openers to the given sentence. We always try and solve these questions by making the mandatory pairs. Now, what are mandatory pairs? Mandatory pairs are the parts of the sentences or the phrases that have to be placed together, come what may. So, these are two phrases that will be together, whatever would be the structure of the sentence. And we check for such pairs. As you could see till now, that most of the answers are we can easily interpret what is the answer if we find a mandatory pair in the options. So there may be a mandatory pair based on the sequence of the events that are happening in the sentence. Now, for example, it's a big sentence which is joined, there are two clauses which are joined by a conjunction, and there would be certain sequence of the events. Now, how do we interpret what would be the structure of the sentence? By checking the sequence of the events, that what might have happened first and what might have happened next. For example, in this sentence, if this is a question, how do I judge what is the correct sequence? Now, I try and make the mandatory pairs. Now, in the first part of the sentence, it says a woman committed suicide. And the fourth part says by jumping, right? So, suicide is committed by jumping. So, 1 has to be followed by 4. So, there is a mandatory pair here. That is, 1 should be followed by 4. Why? Because we are saying that this event is taking place after this event, right? So, 1, it is justifying how was the suicide committed. It was committed by jumping. So 1 and 4 is a mandatory pair. Again, if I check where she had put up, now she was putting up somewhere. Where was she putting up? She was putting up in a hotel. Put up means to stay, right? So put up means to stay, and she was staying in a hotel. So again, 4 and 2 again is a mandatory pair. Now thus we see that 1 and 4 will come together. Likewise, 4 and 2 will also come together. So the trio, a mandatory trio would be 1, 4 and 2. So the phrases 1, 4 and 2 will have to come together in come what may, which happen only in option number C. So the answer becomes option number C. Now, a mandatory pair may also be used by, judged by checking the use of the adjectives for the subject. Now, all these adjectives of the subject have to be clubbed together. They have to come together. Because they are being used for a single entity, they'll be stated together. Now, for example, I see this question. Now, if I see this question, I find two phrases that are qualifying something. Phrase number 1 also is an adjective phrase. Likewise, phrase number 4 is also an adjective phrase. And now, 1 and 4 have to come together. So there is a pair that exists between 1 and 4. Now, how do I judge what is the pair? Is it 4 or 1 or 1 and 4? Now, since 4 starts with an and, so there must be something that is kept before this phrase. So that something is the phrase number 1. So the exact pair is 1 and 4. And I see such a pair only in one option. So the answer becomes option number A. Right. So here, what did I do was, I just judged that there are two phrases that are qualifying something and they have to be kept together. And thereby I got a pair, and that pair is available only in one option. So the answer becomes option number A. We may also find a mandatory pair based on the cause and effect structure. So for example, there's a sentence that has because in it. So because justifies the cause. So the statement of because is the cause, And there must be another statement that must precede because that justifies the effect. Likewise, if in a sentence there's a part with thus. So thus justifies the effect and it has to precede with a cause. So if I see the words like because, thus, hence, therefore, hence and therefore again will justify the effects, because, as, this would justify the cause. So I can make mandatory pair using this knowledge as well. Now, for example, I see this question. Now I've said because, since and as show the cause, and hence as a result therefore will show an effect. Now if I see this question, now if I read this question, it is very difficult to estimate where is the subject, where is the verb, where is the object, because the parts of the sentence are very big. Right, now how do I judge? I see a because in the fourth option, which is towards the end. So this is the effect. Why? Because is placed in the end. If there was a phrase that started with because, so that phrase would have been the cause, right? So this is the effect. So this is the effect, and I have to find some cause to this effect. And in this option number A, I find the cause to this effect. So the sequencing must be 4 and 1, right? Another way of looking at it as the same thing is that of can never precede because, it will always follow, because it is because of. The correct because of is a phrase that tells you the cause, right? So because of, again the sequencing would be 4 and 1, which is happening only in one option, that is option number C. So answer becomes option number C. Here I judged what is the answer by judging the cause and effect pairs. There is a cause given in fourth, the effect given in fourth and a cause given in the first option. So the answer becomes option number C. Now, we may also judge the mandatory pairs based on the words that show some contrast. Now, for example, the words like however, notwithstanding, but, these are the words of contrast. So if there's a phrase that starts with but, we'll have another phrase that precedes this given phrase that will show something happening in contrast. Likewise, if there's a phrase that ends in but, so there must be another phrase that must follow this phrase that shows some contrast, right? So thus we can judge the mandatory pairs based on the contrasting words. Now, for example, this question. This is a very different type of question where the starting of the sentence is already given. It is easier. So there is the starting of the sentence is given. I have to judge what is the next given, what could be the next possible alternative, right? Now it is easier, and if I see phrase number 2, it is easier for men. So my next part has to be for men. Why? Because I have to place the subject here. The subject is the men. So I find the subject in men. So this next part has to be 2. So I eliminate option number 3 and 4, C and D, based on the fact that I have not stated the subject here. So it could be option number A or B as my answer. Now the next thing, if I read the option number, the phrase number 4, it starts with than to explore. So there's this infinitive, right? And than is a contrasting verb. So I have to find another infinitive or a verb that acts contrasting to explore, right? Which is happening in option number 1, right? So thus 4 must be preceded by 1. So 1 and 4 is an option. So 1 and 4 happen in only option number B. So I eliminate option number A and the answer becomes option number B. So what did I do? I find out where is the subject. First of all, the subject is in phrase number 2. So my sentence has to start with phrase number 2. And then I find a mandatory pair based on the concept of contrasts. So there is a contrast existing between phrase number 4 and 1 such that 4 has to follow 1 So the option becomes option number B. Now we may also check or estimate the mandatory pairs based on the continuity of thought. Now, for example, there's something, no, there's a sentence that has a conjunction. As I was sitting there and watching the flowers. Now, here's the continuity of thought. I was sitting and watching, right? So there's something that's happening in continuity. So if I judge this continuity in a sentence, I may also be able to again form some or the other mandatory pair. Let's take an example. Now, for example, in this question, I see two phrases with some figures, 1 and 3, right? There are two phrases with figures, so they have to come together. And how? That 1 should precede 3. So 1 and 3 have to come together. So eliminate these two options. So it could be D or A. And India has become literate. Why has India become literate? Because now here obviously India is the subject, and it has become literate. Why? Because of these two things. I can see it with the continuity, right? And there's a continuity existing. So the sequence must be 1, 3, and then 2. And lastly, literate literate enough for what? To judge. So it has to be 4. I check the continuity and I get the answer as option number A. By this, we get to the end of the discussion of sentence jumbles. I hope you've understood the concept well, and in case you have any apprehensions, you can redo this slide. Thank you and have a nice day.